Hello, everyone. It's great to have you here today. We will be starting in just a moment. I just wanted to greet the early birds and say thanks for being here. We will begin in just a few moments. This call is being recorded, and you will be automatically sent a link to the recording and a follow-up call tomorrow. And we do have that it is 9 o'clock. And welcome to everyone. I'm Gretchen Jordan, the Association Manager for ALIVE, the Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement. ALIVE is the National Professional Association for Volunteer Engagement Professionals. I've highlighted our website on your main screen today and would invite you to check it out if you are a member. You already know. If you're not, look around, and it's wonderful to have you here today. And we are very pleased to partner with Mava and Lisa, our presenter today. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. You should have a GoToWebinar control panel, and there you'll see a chat box and a question box. I'll be monitoring both of those for questions from the audience, and we'll stop throughout the presentation, but we've also allowed for plenty of time following Lisa's presentation for questions. So feel free to type something in or hold them till the end. You should also have received some handouts, which is a few checklists, and as well as the presentation and the actual report itself, and Lisa will be referencing that later. We are very glad to have you all here today. And again, we are recording this presentation. And if for some reason there is any type of technical glitch, hold right on. We'll be right back. Knock on wood, it never happens, but I always like to bring that up just in case. I am going to go ahead and turn it over now to Lisa, and I'll let you introduce yourself and Mava, and then you can get started with your presentation. I'm going to also turn over the screen to you.
Great, thank you, Gretchen. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Jocelyn. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Hey, Gretchen, so it'll show my screen, is that right? She must have muted herself. One moment here.
Yes, it should. We're waiting to view your screen.
Okay. Here it comes.
All right, we see it. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, I'm sorry about that, everyone. So I'm Lisa Jocelyn. I am the Inclusive Volunteerism Program Manager for MAVA, which is the Minnesota Association for Volunteer Administration. For those of you who aren't familiar with MAVA, we connect, educate, strengthen, and advocate for volunteer engagement leaders in their organizations to positively impact communities. And we are the organization in Minnesota that supports and advocates for volunteer engagement leaders. So we do a lot of professional development and training for volunteer engagement leaders. We also really work to help network volunteer engagement leaders and have them give them opportunities to meet and connect with one another. And another thing that we focus on is research. We look into trends happening in the field and try and learn more about those so that we can educate our members on what's happening in the world of volunteerism. And that is where this particular initiative comes from. We actually started this work back in 2009. We received a grant to do a research study on immigrant volunteerism. And that study really showed that there's a lot of potential there and that there are a lot of people interested in volunteering who are not. So that study actually was entitled Relationships Matter. And after that, we did an initiative that was focused on cities, volunteering in cities. And as part of that initiative in 2015, we did a smaller study on immigrant volunteerism for cities, which involved some interviews and focus groups and talking to people who were volunteering for cities and discovering that volunteering with cities was a really good fit for people who are new to the country. And out of that work, it became clear that there was a lot more work that needed to be done and a lot more research that needed to be done. And so we were fortunate to receive a grant from the St. Paul Foundation and began this study on inclusive volunteerism in 2017. So at the beginning, our work was focused more on city and county governments and how to make those programs more inclusive. But it has expanded to nonprofit organizations, and we've discovered that most of the strategies really apply across the board. The initiative has had a number of components. One has been a task force that I've worked really closely with that's been made up of representatives from culturally specific organizations, community volunteers, and volunteer managers who have been able to talk about everything from what does volunteerism mean in different communities to what are barriers and how can we overcome those barriers. We also distributed some sub-grants to organizations that were doing inclusive volunteerism work so that we could learn with them along the way about the challenges and successes of trying to do this type of work. And I did a number of interviews and just talking to people about their experiences. Volunteers finding out if their volunteers reflect the diversity of their community, that did, how they got there, if not, what they tried, what had been successful, what hadn't. So I've really been more or less a sponge that's been soaking up all of this information, looking for trends, analyzing it, and ultimately coming out with these strategies that I'll be presenting today that have been developed in conjunction with my task force and with others involved in the initiative. So this is the result of a year and a half or so of work. We're continuing the work right now by presenting these 8 strategies, trying to get them out there, and also looking at what's next. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So we're going to do a quick poll here. What type of organization do you work with? Nonprofit, government, corporate, or other? Just want to get an idea of who's in the room.
And everyone, go ahead and vote. I'm watching to see how many votes we've got. We'll keep it open for just a few more seconds, but it looks like almost everyone has voted. And if you're calling in on your phone, of course, you won't be able to vote, and it's okay. I'm going to close it and share the results. So as you can see, 88% are with a nonprofit, 8% with government, and 4% with other, no corporate.
Okay, that was about what I expected. So. All right, and the next one, I wanted to check in with everyone about, do the volunteers at your organization reflect the racial and ethnic diversity of the community that you serve currently? So yes, somewhat, and not really.
Thanks for voting. I put one in there too. I don't expect to have any I don't knows, but just to make sure people are really reading the question.
Gotcha.
And okay, we're almost up to, we've got 85% of you have voted. Very good. I'll leave it open for just a few more moments. And we got up to 88, 92%, 96%. I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Great. Well, then this shows that people are definitely in the right place today. So we have 60% not really, 24% somewhat, and 12% yes, and 4% I don't know.
Sounds good. Well, those of you who are a yes, I would love to connect with you and learn more about how you have gotten to that place. So maybe we can connect after the webinar. For everyone else, I'm glad that you're here. Hopefully this will give you a good starting point for how you can take steps to make your volunteer program more reflective of the racial and ethnic diversity of the community that you serve. So with that, we're going to dive into the 8 strategies. A couple things that I want to make clear first before we dive in. First is that not every strategy will work for every organization. They're ideas. They're things that have worked for other organizations, and they're things to try. None of them are going to work 100% of the time, and it's going to depend on your organization and the communities that you're trying to reach. So I want to make sure that you understand that these are kind of a pick and choose different things that you think would work for your organization. And of course, they're not surefire, but they're strategies that have worked for others and that have been effective for other organizations. More or less, they're tools to add to your toolkit. I also want to emphasize that these strategies aren't magic or a quick fix. I think all of you probably know that. Work around diversity and equity and inclusion is long-term hard work. What we're trying to do here is give you a starting point. So these strategies are meant to be approachable things that you can do even starting today to get your volunteer program and your organization on the right track to being more inclusive. It's long-term work that's going to be years, decades in the making probably, but it's important that you start now, because if you don't, you're not going to be any further along in a month or 6 months or a year. So I know that all of you are busy and are wearing a lot of different hats, and this is meant to help you see this as an issue that's more approachable and something that you can actually do something about starting now. Okay, so with that, we're going to dive into the first strategy. And I know Gretchen mentioned this before, but if you have questions along the way, please do feel free to type them in. But I also will leave time for questions at the end. So there will definitely be time that you can do that. And I'm also going to be available if you want to follow up with me via email. So don't feel like this is the only time you can get this information. So the first strategy is shift your language. And I'm going to be upfront that this is the easiest strategy. There's a reason I start with it. It's the easiest one. But what's really important to realize is that the words volunteer and volunteerism are not universally understood. All of us are in volunteer management, so I think we think of volunteering as a happy, positive, wonderful thing. We hear the word volunteer and we think happy, rainbow balloon, unicorn thoughts. That's not the case across the board. And so it's important first to understand that. And just to emphasize or to put a little bit of context around that, I think it's interesting to look at the word, the definition of volunteer, which is someone who does something without being forced to do it, such as a person who does work without getting paid to do it. And the thing that really sticks out to me about this definition is both the without being forced to do it, without getting paid, and also the forced. Forced is a very strong word, so saying without being forced to do it. It's just an interesting way of putting it, and I think you can see now this is just one definition, but I think you can see how it may not seem as positive, happy of a thing if this is the type of definition that you're looking at. Also, for people who are lower income, approaching something as not getting paid to do it, working without getting paid, doesn't necessarily seem like something you might be able to do. So it could be a little bit exclusive in that way. The word that a lot of people are more comfortable with is help. And again, just looking at the definition kind of for kicks here, to give assistance to make more pleasant or bearable, to be of use to change for the better. Those are all things that are very positive, that sound like something that not only everyone can do, but things that everyone should do to be a good human being. And so you can see why some communities are just more comfortable with the word help. And a lot of this comes down to what I think we define as formal versus informal volunteering. Formal volunteering is often with an organization. So you go through the application process, you go through a background check and interview and the orientation, whereas helping is much more informal. you help your neighbor. You watch their kids, you make a meal for someone whose family or who's in the hospital, those sorts of things. But in my mind, they're all kind of the same thing. You're helping other people. It's just through a more formal or a more informal venue. And what's been really important for us to realize is that all communities help one another. Helping is extremely, extremely prevalent in all communities. What's different is that they don't always call it volunteering. So if you ask someone, say, from the Hmong community, do you volunteer? They might say no, but then you might find out that they help for days at their church, and they watch their neighbors' kids, and they do all sorts of things that basically are volunteering in their community. They just don't call it that. They don't think of it as that. So there are some barriers in terms of the word volunteering and how formal that feels. And it's just good to know that it really, when you whittle it down to, is volunteering helping other people? Yes. Is it giving your time? Yes. Well, that's helping, and that's what people across the world and across this country are doing, regardless of their cultural and racial background. And so it's important to realize that helping is universal, but the word volunteer isn't always universal. And what you do with that, I'm not saying that you should change the volunteer tab on your website to help or anything like that. It's just something to be aware of. So particularly when you're having conversations with communities of color, instead of continually using the word volunteer, which I think we're probably all looking for synonyms for, just talk about how they can help. Talk about how people can help each other and can help their community. You don't have to use the word volunteer all the time. And in some ways, what I've discovered is that organizations that do have a large number of volunteers who are from diverse cultural communities, very often they do get comfortable with the word volunteer if that's how the organization refers to it. So you can kind of ease people into being more comfortable with that word, if that's what you choose to do. Another thing that's important to realize here is just how you frame volunteerism. So a lot of times we talk about how a volunteer can help our organization. But in communities of color, it's more effective to talk about how a volunteer or a person can help their own community. So, for example, I used to work for the Red Cross. Instead of saying, hey, volunteer for the Red Cross, you can do all of these wonderful things for the Red Cross, say, hey, by working with the Red Cross, you can do all of these wonderful things in your community. It's so simple. It's a pretty small shift, but I think it's one that's important to realize because a lot of traditional volunteers are from more affluent communities where there's not a huge amount of need in their own community. And so for folks who are coming from communities where there is need, helping within that community is really important. And the organization is kind of not as important. So maybe the organization can give them resources to help, but make the focus on the community. The thing I want to emphasize about this particular strategy is that it's not going to do much if you do this on its own. All by itself, shifting your language isn't going to do a whole lot for your organization or your program. But used in conjunction with the other strategies, it can be really effective in just helping you speak the same language, more or less, and make sure that you're all talking about the same thing when you're talking about volunteering, and making volunteering seem more approachable and more welcoming, because helping is something that people across the country are doing, and that's basically what volunteering is. So thinking about it that way and just being aware that in some cases the word volunteerism can be kind of exclusive. And again, this is the easiest strategy, in part because you really have to do it with other strategies. But I start you off with an easy one because this is extremely hard work, and so try and give you a little bit of a softball here. So the next one, we're going to move to the arguably most difficult strategy, which is building relationships. It's the most difficult because it's long-term. All of us know that relationships aren't built in a day. It takes time. It takes time, and it takes energy, and it takes vulnerability. And so building relationships is something that's not going to happen overnight. It's also the most important strategy. So one of the handouts that you have is an action plan, and it gives you the opportunity to pick 4 strategies that you're going to focus on and put some action items down with timelines so that you have a work plan of where you're going to go after this webinar. The strategies that you can pick, the 4 strategies you can pick, are completely up to you except for this one. You have to pick building relationships because this is the most important strategy. As I mentioned, our work back in 2009 resulted in a report that was called Relationships Matter. So this is nothing new, and I think it's something that all of you probably know, but just to put some framework and context around it, this is something that you have to do. And I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that, a lot of people from all sorts of backgrounds say that they'd volunteer if they were asked, but they're not asked. And so building relationships is really the first step towards making that ask. You can't ask people that you don't know and that you're not in conversation with. So when you're building relationships, 2 things are really important. One is to be specific. Know what communities you want to reach out to. To just say, hey, we want more volunteers from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. We're just going to reach out to everyone. That's not going to work. It's too broad. And I've spoken with multiple people from different communities who have said, you have to pick 1 or 2 to start. And very often folks or organizations are worried about offending the other communities. That, if we decide to start with the Latino community, how is the Somali community going to feel? And how is the Asian community going to feel? And what I've heard again and again is you have to pick one. You can't do a good job trying to engage all communities at the same time. Pick one, put your energy there, learn from it, and then do an even better job when you're ready to engage other communities. So don't be afraid to focus and to narrow in, because that's the only way that you're going to do a good job. And your reasons for picking a community can be as simple as, hey, our office borders on a very vibrant Latino community, and so that makes sense for us. Or we have a program that serves 70% the Hmong population, and we want to really hone in on that. Have a reason, but don't be afraid to have that focus, because it's really the only way that you're going to be able to do a good job. And the second thing is be authentic. You need to know why you're engaging the community, and you need to be able to communicate that with your colleagues, with the community, and with yourself. It can't just be about, well, my boss told me that I need to increase the percentage of volunteers who are racially diverse, so I'm going to do this. That's not going to work. You need to know and believe that having volunteers from diverse backgrounds is going to strengthen your program. It's going to make your services more relevant, and it's going to make your organization better able to deliver on its mission. So be able to communicate that and be genuine about that. What's unfortunate is that a lot of communities of color have been approached just to check a box, to say, yep, we asked them what they thought, but then nothing happens with the information. And so you have to know that there are people who have come before you who have left a sour taste in the mouths of people who are from communities of color, and you have to be persistent and you have to prove yourself. So it might take a little bit of extra effort and really having a lot of conversations and showing that you're authentic. But in time, you'll be able to build those relationships. So just know that if people throw out barriers, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to stop. And particularly, I think we live in a culture where it's like, well, I sent them a couple emails and nobody responded. That is not a reason to stop. You have to make phone calls, you have to knock on doors, you have to try a lot of different things. And just because someone doesn't respond to an email does not mean that they're not interested. So be persistent and keep going and make sure that you're being authentic in your relationship building. So the next question around that is how. How do you build relationships? How do you even start those relationships? So this is actually something that we're building on, MAVA is building on this year, and we hope to have even more information at the end of this year based on our research. But what we've discovered so far is one really good way is to go to those communities and to be present at cultural celebrations, at events, be a vendor, have a booth, talk to people about what your organization offers, go with an attitude of what value can your organization add to their community. Don't go just immediately asking for something from them, because that's just never a good approach to a relationship. But know that if you start talking about what your organization does and how people within the community can be involved, that volunteering is going to be a natural conversation that comes out of that. A few, these types of cultural celebrations are more prevalent in urban areas, but in suburban or rural areas, some of the things that people have had success with are places of worship. There tend to be places of worship that are really specific to particular communities. And also farmers markets are a place where there tends to be a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. And so having a presence at farmers markets, having a booth, being able to distribute information, and just kind of putting yourself within that community. One of my task force members is Hmong and said that there are certain companies that have booths and have a presence at all of the Hmong celebrations and events in the Twin Cities. And she said over the course of several years, they've really come to see those companies as being a part of their community. So it's not something that's going to happen with one time, but if you really make an effort and try to be a part of that community, eventually you'll be seen as that, and that will make relationship building a lot easier. Another thing that's important is to collaborate with others in your organization. So this might seem obvious, but a lot of nonprofits and government organizations can be very siloed. And so making sure that you're communicating about what type of outreach work that you're doing, so that you're not reinventing the wheel, and so that you're not multiple people from your organization aren't reaching out to the same groups or the same leaders about different things with the same organization. So just make sure that you're coordinating those efforts, which probably goes without saying, but as volunteer managers, sometimes we operate in a little bit of a silo, so making sure that people are aware of the work that you're doing and that you're collaborating where you're able to. Another idea that came up is holding open houses. So particularly if your organization is located in a community that's quite diverse, having an open house where people can come in and learn about your services, where you have food, and just kind of a celebration to invite people and welcome people into your building and to learn more about you. And that can go for government organizations as well, just inviting people in so that they feel welcome and they feel a part of your organization or your city or whatever you're representing. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but being persistent. Don't give up if an email isn't answered or a few phone calls. I worked with an organization, one of our sub-grantees, that they're an organization that's trying to promote health and wellness in a suburb of the Twin Cities. And the community is becoming more and more diverse. And they really wanted to hold a community conversation between a Lutheran church, which was predominantly white, and a mosque. And so they had a volunteer who was trying to set this up, and it took her probably 20 different calls and outreach and meetings to finally get this set up, because there were a lot of barriers to break down of, no, we're really genuine about this, and we don't want to just have this so that we can say we had this. We want to know what you think. So it took her a long time to really prove her authenticity and to really get that happening. But they did have the event, and it was phenomenal. And out of that event, they actually had a number of volunteers from the mosque say, I want to get involved. I want to get involved with your group. What can I do? Because it was a good experience and because they were persistent enough to actually get that to happen. But there were many, many points along the way that she could have stopped and said, you know what, this is too hard, or they're simply not interested, and it wouldn't have happened. So just being persistent and making sure that you're doing everything you can and being genuine. Another thing that, was someone going to say something?
Oh, Lisa, it's Gretchen. I just had a question. And in terms of building relationships, are there some common misconceptions or barriers that we should be aware of?
You know, I think the thing that I hear more so often is don't be afraid. Um, I think there's a lot of fear around doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing. And what I've heard over and over is you probably will at some point, and that's okay. Whether it's, in certain communities or cultures, you don't shake hands or you don't hug or you don't do this or you do this. Do your research beforehand, but don't let those fears hold you back from building relationships. And be creative. Go into the community, learn who the leaders are, work with organizations that represent that community. One thing that we've talked about is that there are a lot of culturally led organizations that really work with particular communities. But a lot of nonprofits reach out to those organizations to say, hey, to the staff members saying, hey, can you serve on our board? Can you help us with this? Can you help us with this? And those staff members are leaders in the community and are already tapped. They're probably on 5 boards already. So instead of reaching out to culturally led organizations and asking staff members if they can help you or be part of your efforts, ask them if there's a community member that they work with or a volunteer that they work with that might be interested in your work. So go beyond just the paid staff, go beyond the traditional leaders, and make sure you're including people from all different backgrounds. And people can be really connected even if they're not in kind of a formal position of power. So being creative and being persistent are really the most important things in getting over that fear of doing something wrong. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a comment that someone has found that many farmers markets will give free or discounted space to nonprofits. If you don't know, it doesn't hurt to ask. And that's absolutely true. Because farmers markets, I've had multiple organizations tell me that farmers markets have been a great place for them to connect with a variety of communities and to just put themselves out there and be in a place where people are casual and having fun and just celebrating their community and learning about others. So the next thing I want to mention in terms of building relationships is just understanding the role of cultural liaison. A cultural liaison is a person who maybe gets involved with your organization and then is willing to kind of be the bridge between your organization and the community that they represent. These are wonderful, amazing people who are great assets. But a few things to mention about that. First of all, don't ask the first person of color who applies to your organization to be a volunteer. Don't ask them to be a cultural liaison. Let them engage in whatever way they want to engage. A lot of people get frustrated because it's like, well, yeah, I'm Hmong, but I'm also a computer scientist and I can do all your IT work and that's what I want to do. So just like any other volunteer, ask them what they want to do. Engage them in that way. Once they're engaged in that way, if they come to you and say, you know what, I think there are a lot of other people in my neighborhood or that attend my church that would be interested in this type of work and I'd like to help you connect with them, great. But don't make that the first ask because you need to let them engage in whatever way they want to. They're more than just their cultural background. The other thing to keep in mind here is that when you do have someone who wants to play this role, it's more than just kind of introducing you to a few people. Someone who's a cultural liaison ends up shouldering the weight of really representing your organization within their community. And that can be a lot of pressure because what if your organization does something that offends people? Or what if there's a policy change and a program that helps their community is eliminated? They're going to have to answer for that. So just realizing that it's more than, hey, can you introduce me to a few people, that them vouching for your organization can be really them representing your organization in that community, and that can be a lot of pressure. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask. If someone's interested in it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask. It's just important that you realize the weight of that role and how important it is, but also how much work and how much pressure it is for that person who is playing that role. So just recognizing that so that you can be a better leader and a better partner to them in that role. So that's the end of, for now, of building relationships. Again, this is work that MAVA is continuing to work on this year, recognizing that there's so many nuances to building relationships. And some of the things that we're doing are just trying to figure out additional creative ways that you can go about building relationships with communities of color, learning from organizations who have done this and working with them along the way, so that we can keep track of the challenges and how they've overcome those challenges and mistakes they made and the things they did right. So this work is really continuing, and I encourage you to kind of keep in touch with us about the work that's coming out of this initiative this year around building relationships. So the next strategy is understand the importance of socioeconomic status. And this is one of those that, yeah, maybe it goes without saying, but it's really important to know. One of my task force members just continually said, a lot of recent immigrants are in survival mode. And they're not going to volunteer in the traditional sense of the word. They're not going to be a formal volunteer. What we have discovered, though, is that they just volunteer differently. The concept of reciprocity is even more important for people who are lower income. So, yes, I will watch your children while you go to a job interview, with the understanding that you're going to watch my children when I need to take my mother to the doctor or whatever it might be. So there's that sense of reciprocity that goes beyond just the good feeling that you get from volunteering. One of my task force members said, you know, in our culture, she's from Cameroon, she said, in our culture, the good happy feeling or just feeling good about what you did, that's not really part of reciprocity. It's more about what you get in return. And I think that's particularly true when you have more needs and when you are lower income. So you have to be practical about what you need, and spending your time doing something that you're going to get something else out of is important. And so just understand that people who are in survival mode volunteer differently, and it doesn't mean that they don't get their time, but it does mean that they might not be interested in giving time to your organization at this point. A few things that do make it easier for people who are of lower socioeconomic status to volunteer, providing some amenities. So one thing is childcare. And I know this can be really difficult for organizations because of liability issues and whatnot, but if it's possible to provide childcare, if you're having a volunteer meeting or a volunteer recognition event, or even just a one-time volunteer opportunity, you're going to have a better chance of engaging people who are of lower income if you provide childcare, because childcare is expensive. Or at the same time, you can also make it family friendly. So if it's okay to bring kids, even babies, make it okay for that to happen, and you make it family friendly, then that's another way that you can reduce that barrier. Another thing that can be really important is transportation stipends. Not everyone has a car. And if you're in the city, sometimes it's pretty easy to get around, but in more suburban or rural areas, it can be very difficult to get around. And even within the city, paying for public transportation can add up. So having that sort of stipend available, particularly if you don't have a way of going into the community. So if people are going to have to come a distance in order to come into your office because all of your opportunities are in your office, having that transportation stipend available so that it's more accessible for them. Food is always a fun thing, but even more so for folks who, coming to an event and having a meal might mean even more to them if they are lower income, and that replaces a meal that they have to buy for themselves at home. If you're trying to reach out to a particular cultural community, make sure that your food is culturally appropriate. Do your research. But I think we all know that food attracts people. People like to congregate around food, and it's always a good thing to have, really, if you're trying to attract any type of volunteer. Another thing that we've talked about a lot is that many nonprofit organizations get free tickets or things to baseball games or outings or whatever it might be. And very often we put parameters around that of, okay, each volunteer can get 2 tickets or 1 ticket or whatever it might be, saying, well, if they want to bring more people, they can pay for it. Well, if you're working with volunteers who are lower income, consider changing that. They might not be able to use 2 tickets if they're a family of 4 and they don't have childcare, so give them 4 tickets. And then for them, it's not just oh, yeah, I get to do something for free. It's, wow, we get a night out that we wouldn't have otherwise had. So that can be really important, just thinking about the benefits that you give to volunteers and the things that you give away. And also, instead of doing plaques, offer people gift cards. And again, a lot of it's just about options, what people would most like. And I know we're all looking at how to vary our recognition activities, but it's just another thing to keep in mind when you're distributing things like tickets or prizes or things like that. So the next strategy number 4, is embrace skill-based opportunities. And this is one that's been really interesting because particularly in immigrant communities, there are a lot of people who are looking to build their resumes to get work experience in the U.S. or to use skills while they're waiting to be able to work in the U.S. And so there are several organizations and cities that I've worked with that have been really successful in engaging diverse volunteers in skill-based opportunities. As I said, a lot of people are really looking to build their resumes or just keep busy. Sometimes people are in the country and their spouse is able to work, but they're not able to work, and they may be trained as an engineer or a doctor or a teacher or whatever it may be. They just can't do that in the U.S. yet. And so being able to use those skills is something that's really important to them. Another thing that's important is getting some experience in the American workplace. I've heard from a number of people that the American workplace can be kind of unique. It's not necessarily the same as in other countries. And so when people get the experience or get the chance to volunteer and kind of get a little bit of a taste for the American workplace, it makes it easier when they do get a job. It makes that transition easier. And so a lot of people are looking for that experience, whether it be resume building or just to kind of build their own knowledge of what it's like to work in this country. Internships are another opportunity. More and more of the students going to college these days are from racial and ethnically diverse backgrounds. So consider looking at the demographics of the schools that are near you and reaching out to the ones who do have more diverse students, whether those are community colleges or technical schools or just the public university. But be mindful of that. But having internships can be a really great way to engage students of color in your work and to get their unique perspectives and skills. One thing that you need to be really cognizant of when you're doing this is that skill-based opportunities, with this sort of thing, you're going to need to be more flexible and consider shorter-term volunteers, which a lot of people can be resistant to because, okay, is it a good return on investment if someone's only going to be with us for a month or 2 months? What I've heard from my colleagues who have done this is that, yes, it is a good return on investment, that the work and the projects that they get out of these volunteers and the experience is really valuable and more valuable than the work that they put into training the volunteers. So the answer hopefully is yes, it is a good return on investment. But, a lot of times we say, oh, volunteers have to commit to 6 months or a year or 2 years. And that's not going to be feasible for someone who's looking for work and just looking to build their resume or gain experience. So think about loosening up those regulations and those rules so that you can be more welcoming of skill-based volunteers and people who are looking for work experience. Another thing that we found with this, it's kind of the one exception to the rule of relationship building. Several of my task force members had a lot of luck with online recruitment for these types of opportunities. So they'd have people apply, and come in, and she'd build a skill-based opportunity for them. And then her city became known as a place where people could volunteer to build their skills. And so then she kept getting more and more applications from folks who were immigrants from other countries and looking to build their resumes, and she would create more opportunities for them. So know that this is one place where you may be able to do more online recruitment as opposed to personal relationship building. That's not to say that you should only do online recruitment, but do advertise these opportunities in your traditional ways, whether it's on Volunteer Match or on your website. Do advertise them, because people who are looking for work experience do tend to look in those places. So strategy number 5, recruit from those who use your services. This may seem obvious, and some organizations do a really good job of doing this, but others have some exclusive policies that don't allow people who use their services to volunteer. And in some cases, those are there for a reason. In some cases, they're there historically, and no one really knows why they're there. They've just always been there. So one of the things that is really important is to understand, as I mentioned before, the concept of reciprocity. It's really basic human nature to want to give back to someone or something that gives to you. So why not build on that? The person who receives food from your food shelf in a time of need may want to give back. And that's great. And they should be able to give back. So look at any policies that you have that do exclude clients from volunteering. See how you might be able to revise those. Look at really why they're in place, and make sure that you're not only allowing clients to volunteer, but also that you're encouraging it. Not to say, there's a fine line between saying, oh, you have to give back now, but just a lot of people may come to you and say, I really want to give back, and say, we'd love to have you volunteer. So opening that up, making sure that people who receive your services do feel welcome as volunteers and feel like they can give something back, it really builds on that basic human nature concept of reciprocity and wanting to give back to someone who gives to you, and embrace that. It's important to consider that if people of diverse backgrounds are not using your services, that's the place to start. Instead of asking them to volunteer, why would they volunteer for something that they don't even use, or that they don't even understand? I think one big example that I've come across is parks, regional and national parks. I've asked, do you have a diverse pool of volunteers? And they say no. And they say, but we also, most of the people who use our parks are not of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds. So the first step is getting people into the parks and finding out, what needs to happen for them to want to use the parks and why they're not using the parks. So if you don't have a very diverse pool of clients, look at why that is, and first reach out to people to offer them your services as opposed to asking for their services as volunteers. And again, I can't emphasize enough, just look at the policies that you have. If they're there for a good reason, great, keep them. But if they're not there for a good reason, look at how you might be able to change them to be more inclusive and to allow for people from all different types of backgrounds to give to your program. So the next strategy is partner to engage groups of youth. And I think all of us are pretty familiar with the fact that youth don't, some will commit to long-term opportunities, but a lot of them are really into those one-time volunteer opportunities that they can do with a group. So embrace that. Reach out to groups reach out to schools, Girl Scout troops, Boy Scout troops, groups that are going to have a more diverse pool of students or of kids and who are looking for volunteer projects. If there's 3 different high schools in your area, look at the demographics and look at the clubs. Instead of reaching out to, a random sports team, reach out to the Asian American student group or whatever it might be. Be specific and be targeted. You want to engage youth, and actually a lot of youth from diverse cultural backgrounds are more familiar with the concept of volunteerism than their parents because they've grown up in American schools. And volunteerism is very prevalent in American schools, whether it be through extracurriculars or resume building. So it's a pretty normally understood concept, and something that most kids are pretty used to doing and are accustomed to being a part of. So you're probably not going to get them to be long-term volunteers by engaging them in a one-time group opportunity, but you're still going to get them involved. One thing that's very important with this, when I first started doing this work, I thought, wouldn't it be great to engage youth as a bridge to older volunteers, as a bridge to their parents? And the more I talked about it, people said to me, you know what? Youth and adults don't have the same interests. And that's so true. I mean, they just don't. And so instead of thinking about, how can we engage youth as a bridge to adults, think about how can we engage youth to engage youth. And knowing that maybe it will help build awareness among the adults in their life, but it's probably not going to get you a bunch of adult volunteers. And that's okay. And with youth, very often if they're exposed to your organization when they're in junior high or high school, when they're looking for an opportunity later on, they'll come back to you. So it exposes them to the work that your organization does and to the fact that you are community-based and that there are opportunities for them to give back through your organization. So the big thing here is just be targeted and look at what groups you can reach out to that do have more use of diverse backgrounds, so that bring those diverse backgrounds to your organization, even if it's just for a one-time project. So the next strategy is remove barriers. And this is one that we touched on a little bit, but there are some real barriers to volunteer engagement for some diverse and immigrant communities and low-income communities. And you have to be aware of those. And sometimes overcoming them is not easy, but the first step is being aware of them, and the second step is looking at ways that you can overcome them or at least make it easier. So the four biggest barriers that we came across are background checks, lack of flexibility, language, and exclusive policies. So I'll touch a little bit on each of these. Background checks are a tough one. Many organizations require background checks, and that's just part of how it is in terms of liability. For some folks, people who are not here legally, people who have fears around government, things like that, background checks aren't something that they're gonna do. That's gonna turn them away. There's a lot of fear in some communities right now about deportation and about government just trying to get people out of the country, and so background checks or anything that kind of smells of government is going to turn them away. Now, that's not to say, if you have to run background checks, if they're working with kids, if they're working with vulnerable populations, yeah, you have to run background checks. So the things I encourage are, one, look at your opportunities and see if there are some that don't need background checks. If someone's going to go out to a community event alongside a staff member, they can probably do that without a background check. So not only look at which opportunities don't require background checks, but be intentional about creating opportunities that don't involve background checks. But also know what the policies are with the background check company you use. Can they run background checks on people who are not citizens? Can they run background checks on people who are recent immigrants? Make sure that you know that, and also understand, if a background check comes back and someone has a felony, what can they do within your organization? Does that mean that they can't volunteer at all, or does it limit the roles that they have? Think about how that's exclusive as well. So the awareness around background checks, this isn't something that I've come to a great solution around, but just being aware, knowing what the company that you use can do, and being really intentional about creating some opportunities that don't need to have background checks so that You can include people who either are not comfortable getting a background check or who can't have a background check run on them because of limitations of the company you use. The next piece, language. Language in and of itself is one of the hardest things. Honestly, I've heard groups talk about, well, we did flyers in another language. And it's great if you can carry that out throughout the whole volunteering experience. But don't do recruitment flyers in another language if you don't have the orientation in that language. And for a lot of nonprofits, those resources just aren't there to do everything in one or multiple other languages. So the thing I tell people here is there are a lot of folks out there who speak English, but it's not their first language, and maybe they're not as fluent as they would like to be. And for these folks, public speaking is going to be intimidating. And I've come across several organizations where really all of their volunteer opportunities include public speaking, not necessarily in front of a big group, but interacting with people and explaining things to people and guiding them. And that can be really intimidating for people whose first language isn't English. So make sure that you have opportunities that don't involve public speaking so that you can be more inclusive of people who just really aren't comfortable with that. The example I'm thinking of was a zoo where all of their volunteers were interacting with people who came to the zoo. And they didn't have very many volunteers with diverse backgrounds. And I think that might have been one reason why, is that people who were just worried about their English not being strong enough didn't want to do that type of opportunity. What we have heard from a number of people is that volunteering can help them build their English skills. They maybe just don't want to dive into interacting with the public and having all of what they're doing be speaking English. So keep that in mind, that it can be a great way to build language skills, but it might need to be on more of a just talking with other volunteers and talking with staff in the course of their work type of thing. Another thing that's really important to recognize is lack of flexibility. So a lot of organizations, not a lot, there are some organizations where if you don't show up for one shift, that's okay, but if you don't show up for 2 shifts, you're done. You're just done, or if you're late. More and more organizations are treating volunteers like employees and holding them to the same standards as employees. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I think it's important to recognize that people have other things in their lives, and that sometimes those other things take priority, particularly when it's a volunteer opportunity and you're not being paid. So recognizing that in a lot of other cultures, there's more of a communal society and people rely more on one another within their family and with their neighborhood. And also recognizing that if you're lower income, there are other priorities, and being able to help family members who are making money, or if you get called into work, that's going to take that priority. So my big thing here is make it okay for volunteers that have other priorities. If someone is scheduled for a volunteer shift, but their friend needs to go to the doctor and they're the only person that has a car, they're going to probably take their friend to the doctor. And you know what? They should. That's exactly what they should do, and make that okay. So I think thinking about this just a little less stringently, and I recognize that there are some opportunities that it's like, well, if this person doesn't show up, we're really in bad shape. And that's fine. Maybe some opportunities you do need to have that strictness around. But recognizing, I think really regardless of culture and socioeconomic background, recognizing that people are people and making it okay for them to have other priorities is a good thing, and is something that can make your volunteer program more inclusive and can give you, it can make it easier for people who are of more diverse backgrounds and experiences to volunteer with you. And then the final thing, this isn't the final barrier, but the last one I'm going to talk about is exclusive policies, which I touched on a little bit before with the not letting clients volunteer. That's something that I see a lot in food shelves, and people have explained to me why, and I'll be honest, I still don't completely get it. But look at policies within your organization and within your volunteer programs that are exclusive, and look at if they can be changed. So take a fresh look at everything with the lens of, are these excluding people who are lower income or communities of color or different cultural backgrounds? And make sure that any policies that are exclusive, that you're changing, or at least really having a good reason for them being there and being able to articulate why that's so important. Sometimes policies exist because they've always existed, and no one really knows how they started. So be sure that that's not the case with policies that are exclusive, and really push for eliminating those policies if they are going to be exclusive of more diverse volunteers.
Lisa, this is Gretchen.
Yeah.
I just have another question. I've been monitoring it. I don't see any questions, but something that popped up for me was, you talked earlier about, those commonalities, and that food is something that generally everybody can agree on. Are there other commonalities that we can look at when we're trying to remove some of those barriers?
That's a great question. I think what it all boils down to is people are human, and they want to be understood on a human level, and they want to get to know people, and they want to feel welcome and feel needed. So, another thing that really is universal is that people who are asked to volunteer and who are asked to help are more likely to do so. And asking is a very clear way of saying, we want you involved. So anyone who's kind of sitting on the sidelines saying, I don't think that's for me, or I don't think that's for people like me, if you ask them to be involved, that changes things. So I guess, there are a lot of pieces of this that are pretty universal. Food, asking people to be involved, and building personal relationships. I mean, that's the biggest one. When you get to know people on a personal level, and they get to know you on a personal level, and understand that you're authentic and you're genuine, and you want to have them involved with your organization for really good and true reasons, that's what's going to break down barriers and build lasting relationships in communities, and really start to make a difference within your organization. So that might be a little bit broad, but it's kind of the basic human lived experience. People like to be appreciated for their skills. They like to be appreciated for who they are as a person, and they want to feel welcome and included. And so if you look at everything with that mindset and with that lens, that helps you to start understanding how certain things that your organization is doing are not making people feel that way, and look at changing those things. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, thank you very much.
So the final one, and this one sometimes I almost have to laugh at, because it's a very big job, and it's not something that can happen overnight by any means. But create an inclusive organizational culture, right? We all know how to do that. I recognize that, for most volunteer managers, you have a place within your organization, and maybe it's on the leadership team, maybe it's not, but you can't control everything about your organization. You can't control the culture. You can influence it, but your influence might be limited. So I really want to focus here on things that you, from your position, which for volunteer managers is typically kind of like in the middle of the organization. You report up to someone, but you also have people that you oversee. How you can make a difference in influencing organizational culture. The best thing, of course, is if your organization has vocalized and is making progress on a priority of being inclusive and equitable. But not all organizations are there yet. So if your organization is there, great. But if they're not, don't not do anything. There are things that you can do to start making ripples that will hopefully turn into waves. So some ways that you can look at influencing culture. One is just educating your colleagues across departments. So it gets to the why would we want to engage volunteers of diverse backgrounds? Well, it's going to make our program stronger. It's going to allow our services to be more culturally competent. It's going to bring diverse opinions and experiences into our organization so that we can better serve our clients. I mean, all sorts of those things. So make sure that people that you work with understand that you're not just doing it to get, 10% diverse volunteers because that's what the organization says you have to do, but you're doing it because it's the right thing for the organization, it's the right thing for your program, and it's just the right thing to do. And help them to understand that. Gain support from organizational leaders and ask them to communicate a message of inclusion. So again, easier said than done, but make sure that you're talking to organizational leaders about this and about why you're doing it and about why it's important, and just keep on it. Keep communicating that message, and in time ask them to communicate it to the organization. Again, I know it's easier said than done, but very often when messages come from organizational leaders, they're taken to heart more than just coming from kind of a lateral colleague. So keep working on those leaders and keep telling them what you're doing and why. And then the thing that you can do is create a culture of inclusion within your own department. All of us use volunteers within our own department. And so make sure that just within the things that you're doing, there aren't exclusive policies. And make sure that if you have volunteers that are like, you know what, I don't know that they really would be great at interacting with people from other cultures, then provide training. Do lunch and learn. Whatever it takes, really make that a priority within your own department, and then you can build change from there. So take what you have control over and use that influence and do what you can. Start small. Again, I know easier said than done, but the thing that has come up again and again is that you can recruit volunteers into an organization and do all the right things, build relationships to get them in as a volunteer. But if the organization isn't welcoming, they're not going to stay. So this is one of those things that you can do everything else right, but if your organization really isn't welcoming, it's not going to stick. And so this is something you have to work on in conjunction with those recruitment and outreach efforts. So there are a number of tools that you can use, both with an organization as a whole, but also just to try and educate yourself. And this is actually a list that I'm working on right now with MAVA to try to provide some more resources, because I recognize people have very different budgets. Some of the tools that some of our task force members have used and really felt are good tools are the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory, the Intercultural Effectiveness Survey. There's a Diversity and Inclusion Toolkit from the Charities Review Council. All of those have price tags associated with them. What I'm working on right now is trying to get just more articles and things that you can use as a volunteer manager to build your own cultural competence and to help build the cultural competency of your volunteers. So just keep an eye out for those resources. And as I said, MAVA is developing a more comprehensive list right now. But know that there are always things to do, and you can work on your own professional development around this and work on the professional development of your volunteers and of your own team around this. So control what you can and do what you can within your organization to make everything more inclusive and to make it just a more inclusive culture for volunteers. Another thing, and I might get on my soapbox a little bit here, but if your organization does have a policy or an initiative or a task force or whatever it might be around diversity, equity, and inclusion, make sure that you are being a voice for volunteers around that. Because I think a lot of times there's so much focus on employees, and that's important. Employees are important. But what's interesting is that leaders at an organization don't turn to the HR manager and say, okay, we want to diversify our employees, go do it. Whereas they do turn to the volunteer manager and say, okay, we want to diversify our volunteer pool, go do it. Just like HR isn't a one department thing, it has to be a whole organizational thing, so do volunteers. So kind of using that comparison and making sure that as much as you can, you're encouraging leaders at the organization to involve the whole organization in this process of becoming more diverse in terms of your volunteer pool is really important. And just keep educating and keep pushing and keep advocating for yourself that this isn't work that can be done in a bubble. It needs to be everyone, and you're happy to lead it, but it needs to be everyone working together to build these relationships, to change policies, to build a culture of skill-based volunteers, all of those sorts of things. I'm seeing a question, so I'm going to read this quickly. How can we overcome the language barriers when we don't have the funds in our organization for interpreters or translators? That is one that, I'll be honest, I haven't come to a good conclusion about. At this point, I don't know that there is a way. There's something to be said for, well, are there jobs that people can do that don't, that you can kind of communicate through actions? Maybe, but I haven't figured out a good way or even seen an organization doing a good job of this. It's kind of, either you have the funding for translators and interpreters, or you need to focus on people who do speak English. And that's hard. I don't want to have to say that, and I'm going to keep looking into that. But thus far, I haven't yet come across an organization that's done a great job of including people who are not English speaking when they don't have language or translation services. So that's probably not the answer you were hoping for, but unfortunately it's the answer that I have right now.
Lisa, this is Gretchen, and anecdotally, when I worked for the state of Oregon, we had volunteers that were willing to do some translation of outreach materials, but the state of Oregon wanted to use their official translators. But in larger communities, there may be nonprofit organizations that might be able to help with that. And I would just encourage people to look in their own community and see if there are other organizations that may have some reciprocal opportunities or something available in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. You can look at free or volunteered interpreters or translators. So that's something you can definitely look at. It's a way that you can involve people from a particular community. You don't want to pigeonhole them into that, but it may be something that they're interested in. So that's certainly something you can build. The one caution I would say there is to build it slowly. One of the worst things you can do is to start a program and then not continue it or end it. That really damages relationships with the community. So if you start being able to offer, interviews and orientations and volunteer opportunities in another language, and then all of a sudden, it's reliant on one volunteer or a partnership with one organization, and all of a sudden that fizzles and you can't do it anymore, that's going to do more damage to your relationship with the community than had you never done it at all. Which again, isn't to say you shouldn't try things, but that what I've heard from a number of people is that it's really, really important that you make sure that the efforts that you're starting are sustainable. You need to build relationships with a long-term perspective, and you need to build programs with a long-term perspective. The one exception being if you're really clear up front about, hey, we're doing this project, it's a 3-year project, we really want to work with you on this. But if you start something with the understanding of, yeah, we're doing this great new thing and we're so excited about it, and then it disappears, that can be really damaging. So my only caution there is start slow and make sure that it's sustainable. So I've just got this slide here to summarize all of the 8 strategies. And again, I want to emphasize that these aren't strategies that you need to do in any particular order. They're not something, I mean, some of these you might look at and say, you know what, that's just not going to work at our organization. So I don't start with all of them. Start with 2 or 3 or 4 and create some actions. Use the action plan and make sure that you have some timelines on there. And I tried to make the action plan pretty, so maybe you would put it up, you know, in your office or in your cube, because I recognize that as volunteer managers, we all have a ton of different hats, and sometimes it's hard to really it's hard to keep this as a priority. So try and just take those steps every day, because it's long-term work, and if you wait another year to start it, you're going to be that much further behind. So do what you can and start slowly, but you have to, in your action plan, you have to build relationships. And again, that's the hardest thing, but also the most important thing that is part of this work. I'm seeing a question, so I'm going to read this. Some of our volunteers help translate materials. They haven't helped with recruitment, but I don't know why they couldn't. I guess it's a catch-22, though. You need one volunteer. At least they could speak the language first before they can help with that kind of service. Exactly. So, you know, you have to have the right person come in who not only speaks the language, but that's a skill that they want to share. Because, again, you don't want to say, oh, my gosh, you speak Spanish. We really need you to do this. If what they want to do is be a trainer for your whatever type of your computer classes, you know, whatever it might be. So, having a couple of volunteers in place before you make any drastic changes or really push anything out in the community is always a good practice, because you don't know if a volunteer is going to walk away, and you don't want the program or the initiative to end just because one person wasn't able to do it anymore. So just with everything, keep in mind that sustainability. So I do have a slide here about the action plan. What I encourage you to do is choose up to 4 strategies to prioritize, with the relationship building being one of those. And then put down up to 2 action steps for each strategy and include a timeline. And make sure that you've got some that you can do this week or next week. I mean, it can be as easy as read over the volunteer page on your website and look at ways that you can incorporate other language besides just the word volunteer. And I know that's simple, and again, it's not the only thing you should do, but I want you to feel empowered to take steps right now, because you need to start the work now, and the sooner you start, the further along you'll be in 6 months or a year or 5 years. So create that action plan and get started. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure that I'm taking questions from the group here. So, Gretchen, is it best if they type questions into the chat box?
Either way, I'm watching both. You could type it into the question, and that will be so everyone can see it. But the chat box, if you send it to everyone, they can see it as well. And,
okay,
yeah,
great.
So if there are any other questions, we're just monitoring there, and please ask away. And I will, you know, there are so many great points that you brought up, and I think a lot of these, I really liked what you said about just, you know, don't be afraid to try, because, you know, sometimes people are very reluctant about offending someone, but I think if people understand that your real willingness is to help their community, that will really go a long way.
So I do have a slide up here that's got my email on it, and I want to encourage you that if questions beyond, you know, if your questions strike you tomorrow, don't hesitate to reach out. And also, you know, if you're doing something surrounding one of these strategies or are implementing a strategy that we didn't mention, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear about what you're doing. That's what a lot of my work is just talking to organizations that are doing this work, figuring out what's working and what isn't working and what's replicable for other organizations. So if you are doing something that you think others can learn from, please reach out. I'd love to have a conversation and learn about that. The other thing I wanted to mention, so the handouts that are part of this webinar, the action plan is one of them, but I also included our full report. So this is our 24-page report on the research that was done in 2017 around this initiative. So this is something that has the information that I said today, but also some additional information and stories and things like that. So that's a resource that you can use just to remember everything that we talked about today, but also to share with others within your organization. And I included an infographic that can be an easy way for folks to look at just these 8 strategies and how they come together. Just so you know, in addition to the full report, we do have a 3-page executive summary. So that's available on MAVA's website. And if you are looking for something that you can give to a colleague that's not a 24-page report, but more than a 1-page infographic, the 3-page executive summary is a good fit for that. So you can get that from our website, and it's a good download.
Oh, Lisa, there are a few questions that have come in. One of them says, do you have any examples of organizations that have successes using these strategies?
Yes. Actually, most of these strategies have come from organizations having success and us hearing from multiple organizations that have had success. And then this year I'm working with organizations that have actually seen these as 8 strategies and are trying to implement them. So that piece is kind of in the process. But a few examples that I can give, actually one of my favorites because I think it's just very telling. I visited several libraries as part of this. And it's so interesting because all of the libraries I visited, I said, hey, do your volunteers reflect the community you serve? And they said, yeah, they do. And as I talked to them and we thought about why that is, the library has something for everyone, and it's a very welcoming place. I mean, I was an English major, so maybe I'm unique in that sense. But I think the library is a really welcoming place, and you know, it's a place that you can walk into, and you can get books, and you can take classes, and you can bring your kids there, and all of that sort of thing. So, I think the library is a good example of an organization that's using the strategy around. Now I'm drawing a blank. I've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, so I lost my words. But including clients as volunteers or engaging people who use your services, the library is a really good example of that. And one that often, because you don't really think of people who visit the library as clients. You know, they're people who just engage with the library. And so thinking about it in that sense, then who are volunteers who engage with your organization, and how can you make it so more people of various backgrounds engage with your organization, I think is a good way to think about it. For me, the library kind of gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling, and I can understand why a lot of people would want to volunteer there. So that's one example. Another example is a couple volunteer managers that I worked with. One was for a county and one works for a city. They both were really intentional about emphasizing skill-based opportunities. So they created skill-based opportunities, they created job descriptions, they posted them on their website, and they had a lot of luck getting recent immigrants who were interested in those opportunities. And then as more people kind of heard that, oh, you can volunteer for the city of West St. Paul and, you know, use your skills and build your resume, then she had more people coming to her saying, well, I have this skill, can I do this? So it built from there in terms of the skill-based opportunities. Within the county, they actually had a lot of referrals from their employment counselors, so people who were looking for jobs who wanted to volunteer, and they'd get referrals from employment counselors for that. So there's definitely, I've talked to multiple people who have had a lot of luck with engaging skill-based volunteers. And then, you know, going back to building relationships, every organization that I've spoken to that has been successful in having a volunteer pool that reflects the diversity of their community has built relationships. and they know people in the community, and their programs reflect the needs of the community. And that's obviously a very long-term goal. But building relationships is the key it's the foundation for the rest of the strategies. So those are just a few examples, and I can talk about more if we have time, but I'll see if there's another question first.
Yeah, it's a comment and a suggestion. Utilizing and implementing virtual volunteering for transportation is complicated also for trainings and language barriers. And maybe you have some, let's see, that's kind of well, you can see it in the comments there. It's not really a question, it's a comment.
And sorry, I didn't hear that very well, and I'm not seeing it in the comments yet.
It's a suggestion to utilize and implement virtual volunteering for transportation is complicated.
Okay.
Trainings also for language barriers.
Yes, I mean, virtual volunteering is, I think, something that a lot of us are trying to learn more about and how to make that more effective. It's another trend in the volunteerism world, and that definitely overcomes the transportation barrier. You do have to be mindful of, do people have access to internet and to reliable computers? But I think looking at virtual opportunities definitely can help with that transportation piece. And yeah, there may be ways that it can help with the language barrier as well. So I'll admit that I haven't fully, I have a lot of questions about kind of how to make virtual volunteering work, because so much of my experience has been with volunteers who at least, come in and are on site some of the time. So I think there are a lot of organizations or a lot of people who know more about that than me, but I think that's definitely worth exploring more.
A comment back from the person who made that comment is that she uses them for Phone a Friend for bilingual folks.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. That's terrific. I think we've got time for one or two more questions.
I'm just waiting
if there are any.
To see if any more that come in. And I up on the final slide, you can see there is the email for Lisa plus the website for MAVA as well as for myself and for Alive. And there is, just looking quickly here to see, I think that we have all of our.
So just a couple other things that I wanted to mention. As I said before, this is work that continues to be in process for MAVA. So this is the project that I am working on. I've been with MAVA for about a year and a half, and this is my focus. So we will be coming out with more resources, and I encourage you to kind of stay in touch with MAVA, whether it's just checking our website, or you can like us on Facebook to get different updates. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I think really relates to this is that MAVA also did another research study recently surrounding job equity for volunteer engagement professionals. So really looking at, compared to program managers and development directors and human resources directors, how are volunteer engagement professionals perceived, paid, all of those sorts of things, which I think most of us had kind of a gut feeling that we're not paid as much, and we're not as likely to be part of the leadership team, and we don't have as much influence. And that's really what the study found. So it's very interesting, but it's also looking at ways that we can overcome that and work together to advocate for the field. And so I think that really ties to this work, particularly in the sense of organizational culture and what sort of influence we have over organizational culture. And so if job equity for volunteer engagement professionals is something that you're interested in, I encourage you to look at that report, and we'd love to hear from you, particularly around how we can overcome barriers surrounding job equity in order to advance this work and really promote this work within organizations. And I should mention that
Lisa,
report and the executive summary are available on our website for free.
Yes, and it's great stuff. And I know that Harmeet, MAVA's executive director, is doing presentations around the country at various conferences, and of course at the MAVA conference coming up in just about a month, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's a wonderful professional development opportunity. And we are coming up on our time, and again, you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording. If you weren't able to access the handouts through the presentation, feel free to send me an email and I can forward those along to you. And again, Lisa, I want to thank you so much for sharing this research and your expertise. And it's been wonderful to partner with you and with MAVA, and we look forward to doing it again. And I'd like to wish everyone a great day and a great rest of the week as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.